For decades, the United States Agency for International Development, or USAID, has stood as a symbol of American compassion and global leadership. It has been a lifeline for millions around the world, providing essential aid in times of crisis and fostering long-term development. USAID's impact is undeniable. It is the world's largest humanitarian aid provider. In 2023 alone, USAID delivered $72 billion in aid globally. This aid was instrumental in addressing a multitude of critical issues. These included women's health, clean water access, energy security, and anti-corruption initiatives. USAID's work transcends mere statistics. It represents a commitment to human dignity and a belief in the power of collective action. From providing emergency relief after natural disasters to supporting democratic institutions and promoting economic growth, USAID has been a force for good in the world. Its dedicated staff, many of whom have dedicated their lives to public service, work tirelessly in often challenging and dangerous environments to deliver aid and make a tangible difference in the lives of the world's most vulnerable populations. USAID's approach has always been rooted in partnership. It works closely with local governments, civil society organizations, and communities themselves to ensure that aid is effective, sustainable, and tailored to specific needs. This collaborative approach has been crucial in building trust and maximizing the impact of USAID's programs. For millions around the world, USAID is not just an agency, it is a beacon of hope, a testament to the enduring commitment of the American people to making the world a better place. Its legacy is one of lives saved, communities rebuilt, and opportunities created. However, the future of USAID and the countless lives it touches now hangs in the balance. The year 2025 marked a turning point for USAID, one that has sent shockwaves through the international development community and raised profound questions about the future of American foreign assistance. In a move that surprised many, the Trump administration announced its intention to absorb USAID into the State Department. This decision, driven by a desire to streamline government operations and reduce the federal deficit, has been met with a mix of apprehension and outright opposition. Critics of the move argue that folding USAID into the State Department would undermine its independence and effectiveness. They fear that USAID's humanitarian mission would be subsumed by the State Department's broader foreign policy objectives, potentially politicizing aid and compromising its neutrality. Furthermore, there are concerns that USAID's technical expertise and development experience would be diluted within the larger bureaucratic structure of the State Department. Adding to the uncertainty surrounding USAID's future was the Trump administration's decision to freeze foreign aid funding. This freeze, intended to align aid with the administration's America First policy, brought many vital programs to a grinding halt. Medical facilities in Thai refugee camps faced closure, landmine clearance operations were suspended, and the distribution of life-saving HIV treatments was disrupted. The human cost of these disruptions is immeasurable. The funding freeze and the proposed merger with the State Department sent a chilling message to the development community that American foreign assistance was no longer a priority. The moves have been widely condemned by humanitarian organizations, foreign policy experts, and lawmakers from both sides of the aisle. They argue that these actions undermine America's global standing, erode its soft power, and ultimately harm U.S. interests. The Trump administration's decision to freeze foreign aid funding sent shockwaves through the international development community and had an immediate and devastating impact on vulnerable populations around the world. The freeze, which affected nearly all U.S. foreign assistance programs, brought many vital initiatives to a standstill, leaving those who rely on American aid in a precarious and often life-threatening situation. One of the most immediate and visible consequences of the freeze was the disruption of emergency humanitarian assistance. Medical facilities in refugee camps, already operating on shoestring budgets, faced closure due to lack of funding. Essential medicines and supplies were depleted, and healthcare workers were left with the impossible task of providing care without the necessary resources. This disruption of services had a particularly devastating impact on women and children, who are often the most vulnerable in times of crisis. The freeze also had a profound impact on long-term development projects. Programs aimed at improving agricultural practices, promoting education, and fostering economic growth were put on hold, jeopardizing years of progress and leaving communities in limbo. The uncertainty created by the funding freeze had a chilling effect on investment and economic activity, further exacerbating the challenges faced by developing countries. The suspension of landmine clearance operations was another devastating consequence of the aid freeze. These operations, often carried out in post-conflict zones, are essential for saving lives, preventing injuries and facilitating the return of displaced populations. The freeze forced many clearance teams to halt their work, leaving communities vulnerable to the deadly legacy of war. The consequences of the USAID funding freeze were perhaps most acutely felt in the realm of global health. For decades, USAID has been a leading provider of healthcare assistance to developing countries, playing a critical role in combating infectious diseases, improving maternal and child health, and strengthening health systems. The funding freeze brought many of these initiatives to a standstill, jeopardizing the health and well-being of millions around the world. One of the most immediate and concerning impacts was the disruption of HIV/AIDS treatment programs. USAID has been a major funder of antiretroviral therapy, or ART programs, which provide life-saving medication to people living with HIV. The funding freeze threatened to interrupt the supply of these medications, putting millions at risk of developing AIDS-related illnesses, and potentially reversing years of progress in the fight against the epidemic. Maternal and child health programs were also severely affected. USAID has been instrumental in reducing maternal and child mortality rates by providing access to essential healthcare services, such as prenatal care, skilled birth attendance, and immunizations. The funding freeze forced many clinics and health centers to scale back services or close their doors altogether, leaving pregnant women and children without access to life-saving care. The freeze also had a ripple effect on efforts to combat other infectious diseases such as tuberculosis and malaria. USAID has played a key role in supporting research, developing new treatments and strengthening disease surveillance systems. The funding freeze threatened to undermine these efforts, potentially leading to a resurgence of these deadly diseases. Section 5. Landmines and Legacy, the Unseen Casualties. While the immediate impact of the USAID funding freeze on healthcare garnered significant attention, the suspension of landmine clearance operations represented a quieter, yet no less devastating consequence. For years, USAID has been a major supporter of demining efforts around the world, working to clear landmines and other explosive remnants of war, making communities safe for return and rebuilding. The funding freeze brought many of these operations to a halt, leaving behind a legacy of danger and hindering post-conflict recovery. Landmines and unexploded ordnance pose a significant threat to civilians in post-conflict countries, particularly children who are often drawn to their colorful and curious appearance. These hidden dangers prevent communities from returning to their homes, farming their land, or accessing essential services. They hinder reconstruction efforts and impede economic development. USAID's support has been crucial in enabling demining organizations to clear landmines, provide risk education to communities, and assist victims of landmine explosions. The funding freeze forced many of these organizations to suspend their operations, leaving communities vulnerable to the deadly legacy of war. The suspension of demining operations not only had immediate humanitarian consequences, but also long-term implications for peace and stability. Landmines and unexploded ordnance serve as a constant reminder of conflict, hindering reconciliation and perpetuating a cycle of violence. By clearing these remnants of war, USAID has not only been saving lives but also creating conditions conducive to lasting peace. Section 6. A Muffled Voice, the Erosion of Soft Power. Beyond the immediate humanitarian consequences, the Trump administration's actions towards USAID signaled a broader shift in American foreign policy, one that prioritizes hard power over soft power and undermines America's global standing. For decades, USAID has been a key instrument of American soft power, projecting American values and advancing U.S. interests by promoting development, democracy, and human rights around the world. The decision to freeze funding and potentially absorb USAID into the State Department sent a message to the world that America is retreating from its global leadership role and abandoning its commitment to international development. Soft power, as opposed to hard power, relies on persuasion, diplomacy, and attraction rather than coercion or force. It is the ability to influence others through the power of example, ideas, and values. USAID, with its focus on humanitarian assistance, development, and democratic governance, has been a powerful tool for projecting American soft power. By providing aid and assistance to countries in need, USAID has fostered goodwill and strengthened relationships with governments and people around the world. It has demonstrated American compassion and generosity, enhancing America's image and influence on the global stage. Furthermore, USAID's work in promoting democracy, human rights, and good governance has helped to create a more stable and prosperous world, ultimately advancing U.S. interests. The Trump administration's actions towards USAID signaled a retreat from this approach, undermining America's soft power and jeopardizing its global standing. By cutting aid, and potentially absorbing USAID into the State Department, the administration sent a message that America is turning inward, prioritizing its own interests over the needs of the world. Section 7. A question of legality, Congress cries foul. The Trump administration's attempts to dismantle USAID and freeze foreign aid funding were not only met with widespread condemnation, but also raised serious legal questions, prompting a backlash from Congress and setting the stage for a potential constitutional crisis. At the heart of the legal battle was the question of whether the Trump administration had the authority to unilaterally dismantle USAID and withhold congressionally approved funds without the consent of Congress. The Constitution grants Congress the power of the purse, meaning that it has the sole authority to appropriate funds for government spending. While the president has some discretion in how those funds are spent, Congress retains ultimate oversight and can place restrictions on how appropriated funds are used. In the case of USAID, Congress had already appropriated funds for foreign assistance programs through the regular budget process. The Trump administration's decision to freeze those funds was seen by many lawmakers as a violation of Congress's constitutional authority. Furthermore, the Trump administration's attempts to absorb USAID into the State Department without congressional approval were also met with legal challenges. Critics argued that any significant reorganization of a government agency, such as USAID, requires congressional authorization. They pointed to the fact that Congress created USAID through the Foreign Assistance Act of 1961, and that any changes to its structure or mission would require amending that law. The legal battle over USAID highlighted the delicate balance of power between the executive and legislative branches of government. While the president has broad authority in foreign policy, Congress retains significant oversight powers, particularly when it comes to spending and the organization of the executive branch. Section 8. The Uncertain Future. A World Holding Its Breath. As of February 2025, the future of USAID remains shrouded in uncertainty, leaving the international development community and the millions who rely on American assistance in a state of limbo. The Trump administration's actions, while disruptive and damaging, have yet to fully dismantle USAID. However, the agency's ability to carry out its mission effectively has been severely hampered, and its long-term viability remains in question. The funding freeze, while partially lifted to allow for some emergency humanitarian assistance, remains largely in place, preventing USAID from planning and implementing long-term development programs. The uncertainty surrounding the agency's future has made it difficult to attract and retain qualified staff, further eroding its capacity. The lack of a nominated administrator for USAID has also contributed to the sense of uncertainty. Without a confirmed leader, the agency lacks clear direction and is unable to effectively advocate for its priorities within the administration. This leadership vacuum has created a sense of drift and demoralization within the agency. The international community, accustomed to viewing the United States as a reliable partner in development and humanitarian assistance, has been left bewildered and dismayed by the Trump administration's actions. The damage to America's reputation as a global leader in these areas is significant and will be difficult to repair. Section 9. Echoes of Indifference, a Bleak Outlook. The potential consequences of a diminished or absent USAID are far-reaching and profound. For millions around the world, USAID represents a lifeline, a source of hope in times of crisis, and a catalyst for a brighter future. The agency's work in promoting global health, combating infectious diseases, providing humanitarian assistance, and fostering democratic governance has touched countless lives and made the world a safer, healthier, and more prosperous place. A weakened or absent USAID would leave a void that would be difficult to fill. Other donors, while important, lack the resources and global reach of the United States. The most vulnerable populations, those struggling to survive in poverty, conflict, and disaster, would be the hardest hit. They would face increased risks of disease, hunger, and violence. Their hopes for a better future would be dimmed. Beyond the immediate humanitarian consequences, a retreat from global leadership in development and humanitarian assistance would have profound implications for American interests. It would undermine America's soft power, erode its global standing, and make the world a more dangerous and unstable place. It would signal to the world that America is no longer willing to lead, to shoulder its share of the burden in addressing global challenges. The Trump administration's actions towards USAID are not merely a matter of budget cuts or bureaucratic restructuring. They represent a fundamental shift in American foreign policy, one that prioritizes narrow self-interest over global engagement and compassion. The consequences of this shift will be felt for years to come, not only by those who rely on American assistance but also by the United States itself.